Hello, I'm Kevin O'Hare with the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support in the Office of Standards Assessment and Accountability. Today we are going to discuss an area that impacts a large number of Kentucky schools: achievement gap. The Kentucky Department of Education is focusing on the difference in academic achievement between student groups. Even though improvement has been steady over time, it has been in the areas related to the higher performing student groups within schools. For some of our student groups, the gap has continued to widen. The measurement for achievement gap is calculated between a student demographic group compared to a reference group for reading and mathematics combined. The reference group will be the highest performing group. In order for a student group to be identified or reported, the N count must be met. Kentucky requires each reported subgroup to be based on at least 10 students at each grade per content area within a school or district. This is to protect the student's identity when reporting small numbers and not being able to track back to a specific student, as noted in the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. The N count information is available on page 51 of Kentucky's State Plan, which was revised in March 2019. As we navigate into specifics related to achievement gap, I first want to remind all viewers that achievement gap is no longer an indicator. Instead, the Kentucky Board of Education moved to use it to assist with the overall rating. That impact meant that once the 6 indicators determined an overall 5-star rating, if significant achievement gaps were found at a school, whether it be 1 significant gap or 5, only those ratings of 4 and 5 would be impacted. They would be reduced by 1 star. The data represents both statistical and practical significance, or gaps, for student groups. Statistical shows the mathematical probability that a relationship between 2 or more variables exists. Practical refers to relationships between variables with real-world applications. A statistically significant gap is real and not a result of chance, by accident, or a mere coincidence. The statistical tests are completed between each comparison and reference group to determine if a gap is shown. Additionally, the size of the difference and the number of students in the student demographic group gives one a better idea about the practical significance and impact of a statistical result. Like many other areas represented in the accountability system, points are awarded for apprentice, proficient, and distinguished. The point distribution for performance levels are applied for students representing a specific student group compared to the reference group to determine if a significant gap does exist. Slide 6 actually represents a handout that shows how a comparison can be made between the student group and the reference group. For example, Hispanic could be the student group represented, and African American could be the reference group at a school. Some examples listed on the slide show the student groups on the left and who and how they would be compared on the right column. It has been noted many times how a significant achievement gap can impact an overall accountability rating based on the 5-star method. Again, that rating is based on the 6 indicators representing the Kentucky accountability system. Identifying achievement gaps and impacting the star rating express that different student groups in high-performing schools are important. In previous accountability systems, achievement gaps could go unnoticed in very high-performing schools. The approach in this new accountability system impacts both ends of performance: very high-performing schools and very low-performing schools. Very low-performing schools with significant achievement gaps will be identified as TSI, CSI, or ATSI. However, very high-performing schools will never be identified as TSI, CSI, or ATSI, but they could have significant differences in student group performance. By impacting the star rating at the highest level, emphasis is put on closing those achievement gaps. On slide 9, 5 sample schools are identified, first with their overall rating based on the 6 indicators shown on slide 8. After the indicators determine the rating, then it is determined if there are significant achievement gaps identified at the school. As we noted on slide 3, the number of significant gaps does not impact the rating. The identified gap would reduce the rating by 1 to any school who had a rating of 4 or 5. School A does have a gap, so with their initial rating of 4 stars, the overall rating would be reduced from 4 to 3. Schools B and D have no gaps identified, so no rating would change for those schools. Schools listed at C and E both have gaps, but their overall rating has not been impacted. This is due to the guidance from stakeholders that the gap not reduce ratings at 3 or below. Now we have looked at how we have identified an achievement gap and how it impacts accountability. Let's see how it could be represented when fall reporting is released on the school report card. I want to emphasize could, as slides 11 through 14 are prototypes that could possibly change before reporting has been finalized and released. KDE anticipates that you will see the number of tests represented along with a gap rate, which would be linked to the statistical and practical test, to also determine if there was in fact a difference when comparing the student group and the reference group. The last thing in the reports will be if the difference is significant. The next slide does not show the significant column listed. It is anticipated that under significant will be represented with yes, N means no significant gap, B is blank, or the N count is not at 10 or higher, and R is the reference group. Again, slide 11 shows the achievement gap overview and some of the areas that you can see during reporting. This is not all the areas that will be shown, but as noted during slide 10, these are prototypes that could change. Slide 12 shows how the stars provided for the overall rating at the schools are or could be impacted by certain areas. If you notice the blue arrow pointing to Learn More, by clicking on that link, you will be given additional information that you will not see on the initial landing. On slide 13, after clicking the Learn More link, this page shows the classification for the school represented, along with what caused the classification and also the achievement gaps identified. This particular high school saw significant achievement gaps in their students with disability subgroup and African American subgroup. If this school had been a 4 or a 5, they would have been reduced a star due to the achievement gaps identified. With the school being listed at a 2, the overall rating was not lowered. The last prototype from the school report card shows an elementary school breakdown on the school accountability page. Here you will see this elementary school received 4 stars, but had significant achievement gaps in both African American and Hispanic or Latino subgroups. This would mean that the school would have been a 5. However, these significant achievement gaps lowered the rating down to a 4. Anytime an achievement gap is identified for any subgroup, or any student period for that matter, our goal should be to reduce or remove that learning gap, or gradually close it over time. In Kentucky, the goal is to decrease all achievement gaps to 100% proficiency for all students and reduce each student group by 50%. In doing that, Kentucky has set long-term goals starting in 2019 with a baseline for each subgroup. Targeted goals have been established through 2030 to focus on standards set each year to move our students forward. Specific details will be shared regarding long-term goals in the 2018-2019 Accountability Reporting and 2020 Spring Testing section presented by Jason Howard. This concludes the session today on Achievement Gap. If you have questions regarding Achievement Gap and how it impacts overall accountability ratings, please feel free to email dacinfo@education.ky.gov or by calling our office at 502-564-4394. Thank you and have a great day.